So I've been watching the show The Bear, and if you haven't seen it, it's really good. It's about a sort of a wonderkind celebrity chef who burns out and comes back from New York to work at his dead brother's sandwich shop to try to, revive the sandwich shop because it's fallen apart. It's super good. The one particular episode in this show, episode 7 out of 8, it's called Review. It absolutely blows my mind. I consider it a masterclass in how to build and maintain tension, as well as just all the other good story elements seem to be working on a much higher level in this episode, and I want to talk about it. So I kind of use tension and conflict sort of interchangeably. It's this sort of tone idea that the more tension there is, the more likely characters are going to be forced to make decisions and drive the plot forward. But again, those decisions have consequences, and so there's always going to be this escalation. And so the more tension you have, the more quickly things escalate, both in the story, but also in the heightened emotions of the characters. So before I go into actually what happens in the episode, I want to talk about some story and directing choices that creatively make this such an intense experience. First of all, this episode plays out in real time, which is not normal. Most episodes play out in little bits and pieces. Each scene, plays out in real time, but the story itself plays out over the course of a day or a week or a month or a year if you're, Game of Thrones. And so that's one thing that really ratchets up the tension because everything has consequences when you're experiencing it in real time. There was a Jay Baruchel movie that came out a while ago called Real Time. Very similar experience. Time just goes slower when you're going in real time because everything matters. The episode also does this slow ramp where instead of normally, I'm a big believer of cut to the chase, get in early, get out late, if you've ever heard that for scene writing. But this episode doesn't start traditionally like that. It starts very slow, very atmospheric. It's kind of like a tone poem where you're seeing sort of a montage of Chicago with little character moments. But this slow meanderingness actually kind of sets the tone and the pacing for the episode because it starts this way, but as soon as you get into the kitchen, things pick up quickly and they keep just escalating and going faster and faster and faster until you get to the end of the episode. There's also the why today of the episode, which is a question you need to always ask yourself when you're writing an episode. Why this day? And this day in particular, it's because they're trying out Sydney's to-go order ideas. Carmy's kind of been against the idea of doing to-go orders from the beginning, but Sydney's been pushing for it. Today, they're trying it out. That's the why today. And sort of coming off of the fact that this episode happens in real time, the episode itself is very lean. There's no time to establish things. There's no time to contextualize things. There's no time to have real proper character moments. It's go, 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 go. And which is a really interesting way to write. I really like that a lot. I'm a big believer in the leaner you can get the script, the better. And this is one of the leanest stories I've ever seen. Also, there's the fact that this is episode 7 of an 8-episode season. There's been a lot of setups being happening in previous episodes that this is the episode where everything pays off. This is where everything comes to a head. That includes Marcus and his donut thing. He's been doing this donut thing the whole time. He's been trying to find the perfect donut. Today's the day. There's also Sydney gave out a dish that she tried to get Carmy to put on the menu the other day that wasn't ready. And there's going to be this review that comes out about it. And so her dish is going to be on everybody's minds. There's also Tina, and Tina's sort of one of the OG people in the restaurant. She was kind of the last holdout that wasn't on Sydney's side because Sydney was this new person trying new things and Tina liked the old way. Well, Tina recently came around, and so now Tina is kind of a true believer in Sydney. And then there's also this idea of Carmy's anger. It's the question of why did he leave New York? Why does he not talk about New York? And this is the episode where you really see the face of Carmy that he doesn't like to show people. And really, they're in parentheses, this is why he's not working in New York. And there's a lot of sort of unsaid character dynamics. There's Carmy and Sydney trying to impress Carmy, but Carmy constantly, in small ways taking her down. There's also Sydney and Richie. Sydney is this optimist and she believes in progress and change and making things better. And Richie's sort of old school and doesn't like change and really considers Sydney a threat for everything he believes in. And then again, I sort of already talked about Sydney and Tina. Tina was the last holdout and Sydney charmed her over, surprisingly. So let's talk about the directing for a second. Well, the first thing, again, I already talked about, it was the sleepy, opening on the greatest hits of Chicago montage. That was a visual choice in order to establish the tone and the pacing of the episode, because this is one of those episodes where the pacing is going to just keep going faster and faster and faster until it becomes unbearable by design. There's also the fact that, and I didn't actually notice this the first time I watched it, I only realized it the second time I watched it, they did Birdman. They did the whole one take, the whole oneer, there's no cuts thing. I'm not convinced they shot this entire thing in 20 minutes. I'm not even convinced that's possible, but they did do the thing where it's the appearance of a oneer where they hide the cuts somewhere in the movement of the camera. And that's to give this impression of everything happening in real time, everything happening matter-of-factly as we're experiencing it. And what happens when there's no cuts, when there's no edits, there's no time to reset. There's no time for you to take a breath. There's no time for your brain to go, okay, we had that moment, we're moving on. So it does this weird unconscious thing to your brain where you're basically treating the entire episode as one moment because there's no stopping period. There's also the fact that the camera is sort of documentary handheld style, so it's kind of like in the faces, and you really get the impression that you're that extra person walking around in the kitchen. You're the person listening for sounds. You hear something, you look over here, you see them have a moment, you're doing that. It's very much you're the person in the story with these characters, and you're not going to get that on a dolly or a tripod or a long zoom. You need to be physically in the kitchen with these people, and so that's the reason for the handheld camera. And the last thing I want to touch on, I've already kind of talked about, which is the increasing pacing over time. And so it's not just in how people talk, but it's their heightened emotions, their intensity over time gets crazier and crazier, especially Carmi, but also the noise in the room. The printing machine gets louder and louder. There's people shouting. It's like as time goes by, it goes from this very quiet, atmospheric Sufjan Stevens story to people just screaming at each other as all the noises in the world are happening in this kitchen. Yeah, it's an A to B. And this is all to say this was all planned. I'm sure they found some stuff on the day. I'm sure they found some performances they weren't expecting, but it was very meticulously outlined and drawn out, and I'm sure the writing of the episode at least took at least twice as long as the next episode. And so with all that in mind, I want to talk about what actually goes on in the episode, so here we go. So like I said before, it starts off with stills and sort of just cinematic cityscapes with Sufjan Stevens in the background. A radio station is talking about, this is a morning of Chicago. It's a little chilly. Everybody's on their way to work. We see some of the characters, waiting for the bus, riding the bus. We see sort of just all the stuff that is Chicago. Michael Jordan, Obama, all that kind of stuff. And it's this very sort of like atmospheric tone poem I said before. And it ends on Carmi walking the last block to the restaurant. And so once we get into the kitchen, there's basically no cuts for the next 17 and a half minutes or the entire duration of the episode. So the first person we see when we're in the kitchen is we see Marcus. He's doing his donut thing. And if you just see it for the first time, it's just the bakery guy doing donut stuff. But if you have the context of all what's been building up for the last 6 episodes, he's been obsessed with this idea of the perfect donut. And today it seems to be the day he's going to master it. It's neither here nor there. I feel like the first rule of any scene or any episode is going to be, does it stand on its own? And I think this is an example of, even with the leanest possible story that happens in real time that goes super fast, as long as every character is behaving the way they're supposed to behave, and there's escalations where there need to be escalations, and characters react to those escalations correctly, you don't need extra context. But in this case, because this is episode 7, there's a bunch of context that does matter to this episode. I'm just saying it's really nice that they got the groundwork done first, and then context is sort of the icing on the cake. And so the first thing we hear is Ibram is reading from the paper, and we realize this is a review of a restaurant, and that's when we see Sydney come in. She's listening to Ibram as he's talking, and she's realizing that the review that's being taken place is about their establishment, and it's specifically about a dish she handed out by accident the other day. And she has this moment of sort of flattery, and then immediately it switches to absolute horror when she realizes that this is going to be a slight against Carmi, her boss. And so she needs Ibram to kind of shut up as quickly as possible. But Ibram keeps reading, and Carmi shows up and sort of checks in, realizes Tina's not there, Tina's going to be late. And Sydney is trying to get Ibram to shut up. Carmi tells Ibram to shut up just after he announces that today they're going to start the to-go orders. He doesn't seem super enthused. Sydney tries to explain to Carmi that this was just an accident and it was a dish she gave out to the guy. She didn't realize he was a reviewer. He says it's cool, but he does sort of quote the review a little bit, and you realize that he's not super happy about it. And that's when Tina shows up with her son who got suspended, and she's saying, hey, can he work here today? And Carmi's like, I don't know. And then he looks at Sydney and goes, you know what, Sydney, you're going to handle Tina's son today, which is a slight because she's already doing Tina's prep with her own prep, and now she's going to have to babysit a kid. So it's these little slice that Carmi does through this entire episode. And then Richie comes in, and Richie is sort of the big kid of the whole group. He's a mess. And he comes in reading the article too, and he immediately goes to Carmi and goes, this is bad, right? And Carmi goes, yeah, well, the guy's a crock. Richie was basically saying the same thing Carmi was without them even having talked about it ahead of time. And so Richie immediately goes to blame Sydney about this, and she pulls him aside and says, what's going on, Richie? And he says, you're trying to ruin this establishment. You're trying to drive out the old customers, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, no, first of all, it was an accident. Second of all, if more customers come in, that's good for everybody. So I'm just trying to do my best. And if that means more people come in, that's good for everybody. And Richie's not having it. And they keep going back and forth. So Carmi goes and breaks up the argument. And she goes, well, I was just trying to talk to him about to-go orders. And Carmi goes, yeah, we're doing to-go orders. Don't worry about the article. But yeah, to-go orders were your idea, Sydney. So it was another slight against Sydney right there. And so he tries to go back into the kitchen and she tries to stop him and say, hey, can we talk? I feel like we're not on the same page. And he blows her off. He says, hey, can we just get through the day? And he hears Tina screaming from the back, so everybody runs to the back to find the to-go order printer is completely out of control. And Sydney jumps in because, again, this is her baby, and she realizes she left the pre-order on, and so there's like 100 pre-orders, which is catastrophic. So Carmi decides to announce they're just going to start cooking everything because they have 40 orders to do in 8 minutes, and everybody starts scrambling. And so Sydney turns around to check on Marcus about the cakes because they have a bunch of cakes they have to do, and he's still playing with donuts. And she kind of yells at him and is like, you need to put the donuts away. We're doing cakes. And he goes, well, I'm working on that. And she turns around and Carmi's angry and back at her station. And she's trying to explain to him how she sorted out the orders. And he goes, hey, step out. And then he screams at her, get out of my station. And so she gets out of there and she goes to grab some cakes because the cakes need to go get cut. She goes around the corner and crashes into Richie and drops the cake. And Richie, because he's the big kid of the group, goes, well, you didn't say corner. She tears into him. She's like, you suck. And he's like, well, hey, this is all your fault anyway, which is just what Richie does. And so Tina comes over to console Sydney, who's just not having it. And Sydney basically says, this place sucks. Everything sucks. I don't even know why I'm here because there's no point for me to be here, which really hurts Tina because, again, Tina is now Sydney's biggest fan. Carmi orders Sydney to start prepping something and then has a brain fart and orders Richie to do the same thing, which is bad because they both end up at Sydney's station prepping the same thing. And Sydney says, get out of here. And he says, stop it. And she basically tears into him and tells him the stuff that nobody's supposed to tell another person, especially Richie. And he gets in her face because they're actually having beef. And she ends up like holding her chef knife down. He's like, you're going to stab me? And there was that real moment where maybe she was going to stab him. That's how much she hated him in that moment. So Carmi splits him up. And then as he's going to go do something, Marcus stops him with a jelly donut and is like, hey, I figured it out. And Carmi loses his cool and is like, now, today's the day, and screams at him and knocks the jelly donut on the floor. And Marcus just takes it as personally as you can take it because it was absolutely devastating. Richie sees Carmi freaking out and is like, hey, maybe you should chill out. Maybe you should stop yelling. And Carmi says, not now. And so Richie backs up and ends up getting stabbed in the butt with Sydney's knife. Total accident. You see Sydney crumple up against the back wall because she's having just a total meltdown. As Richie goes, well, now I need the first aid kit. Let's go patch up my butt. So Richie's getting patched up in the front by Ibram, who's telling him the plot of Black Hawk Down, which is absolutely kind of hilarious. As you follow Carmi just yelling at people as he goes back and forth until the camera ends up in the locker room looking at Sydney, completely having an out-of-body experience. And Carmi sees it and goes, hey, are we good? And she doesn't say anything. And he says, hey, are we good? She doesn't say anything. And then he goes, are we good? And she goes, no. And she takes her shoes off, puts her old shoes on, packs her stuff, and is about to go. And she gets in his face and she goes, I quit. And he goes, why are you doing this today? And she goes, you're a great chef, but you suck. And she leaves. And at this point, Carmi's completely aware of how horrible he's been. And so she walks out. He throws a pen at her. So now that Sydney's gone, he looks down and sees the jelly donut and he squats down and he takes a piece and he pops in his mouth and he gets this big smile because it's actually fantastic. And he stands up with this big smile and he marches over to the machine spitting out the orders and he smashes the machine and he goes into the office and slams the door, and that's the episode. And it was absolutely 20 minutes of total pandemonium, starting with a really chill out vibe all the way to everybody in the thing being wronged or losing their cool or being stabbed. It was everything. It was the gambit. They kitchen sinked the episode. It was fantastic. And then you're going right into the next episode for the season finale, and that's the end of the show. Super cool. Very impressed. I'd be surprised if this episode 7 doesn't get nominated for an Emmy because it is that good. It is both a tour de force in the writing, specifically all the planning, all the pacing, all the setups and payoffs. But then there's also the directing aspect, which they went for it. They went to do something very technically difficult with the expectation that it's going to elevate the piece. And I think they pulled it off. I think the total, what they delivered was more than the sum of its parts because of all the planning and the prep and all the little character choices that had to happen when they happened, not only in this episode, but in the place of the episode that it existed. I'm completely blown away. I think this needs to be taught in schools. So yeah, so good job. Good job to the writers and production of The Bear. They went for it. They found something very difficult and very high risk, and I think they executed on it at a level that most shows have trouble getting to. And they did it in their first season. That's even more incredible. So I'm looking forward to more episodes whenever that happens. That's it.